The Umayyad conquest of Hispania was the initial expansion of the Umayyad Caliphate over Hispania, largely extended from 711 to 788. The conquest resulted in the destruction of the Visigoth kingdom and the establishment of the independent empire of Cordova under Abdurrahman I, who completed the unification of Muslim-ruled Iberia, or the Andalus, 756 to 788. The conquest marks the westernmost expansion of both the Umayyad Caliphate and Muslim rule in Europe. Forces commanded by Tariq ibn Zayd disembarked in early 711 at Gibraltar at the head of an army consisting of Berbers, northwestern Africa. He campaigned his way northward after the decisive battle of Guadalete, I don't know how to pronounce that, against the usurper Roderick. Roderick was the Visigoth king, after which he was reinforced by the Arab force led by his superior Wali Musa ibn Nusayr by 717. The combined forces had crossed the Pyrenees into Septimania province 734. Yeah, so that's when they came.
Do we know why they came? Did you uncover any sort of like inference that
No, but
they were invited, like they were in Egypt?
Invited? Do you think they were invited?
No, the Muslims claim that there was some trouble going on in in Egypt, and they were invited to help on one side of the disagreement, and then they conquered Egypt as part of the deal. They, the history of Islam.
I don't know about that.
Yeah,
like you have to take that with a huge pinch of salt. But here you can see like how the conquest spread. So you see that it spreads throughout the Mediterranean here on the southern side, and here they pick up a lot of Berber tribes that joined them. So they reached there, and for those who are not looking, this is just a picture of. I'm going to talk a little about this documentary later. But anyway, there you can see. Then they went over to Spain. You can see the other. You know what? We talk about the Battle of.
Let's be careful playing this, just because they might copyright strike us.
Yeah, exactly.
Paste that link, if you would, into the main chat, so people who want to watch that documentary can actually go and have a look at it.
Yeah. Okay, I can talk about that while I'm looking for the battle of. Oh, I do it here instead.
Well, the funny thing is that this whole justification thing, of course, is that Muslims only have battles when it's in defense. So everybody remembers when the Spanish, the Algerians, the Libyans, the Egyptians, everybody was attacking the Arabian Peninsula, which is why they were defending themselves, of course, in Spain and Algeria and all the other places.
I mean, that is just like, it's kind of funny when you listen to what when you listen to this sheikh / historian, Egyptian historian, and compare that to this documentary, like the Egyptian sheikh / historian, he's very honest. Like, we do the conquest because we're gonna spread Islam, we're gonna spread the Dawah, we're gonna free this all those barbarians from their jahl, their ignorance. So they are completely honest that it is a conquest, and they're,
they're an empire.
Yeah, it's an empire, it's a conquest, it's not. But this documentary, this BBC documentary, I mean, sometimes I have to bring my shame pillow when I'm looking at that documentary, because they are like.
Well, it's not a documentary at all, is it?
Yeah, they are like sugarcoating it so much, it's insane. They're even like, I started laughing when I heard they say, there is a palace. I think it's called something like what's it called?
Are you talking about the Alhambra?
The Green Palace or something. No, another one. The Green Palace or something like that. And he said the ruler, I remember what ruler it was, if it was Abdurrahman I or something like that. He built it for his favorite, she said. His favorite what?
It was his favorite female slave, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he didn't say anything about that. They completely
See
left
how
that
well
out.
they treated the slaves? There you go.
No, but she didn't even mention slaves. So they are like sugarcoating it. That documentary is really insane.
That's a bit further on there.
They just went to Spain to create a free environment for the Christians and Jews that were constantly fighting there.
Yeah. So, okay, but if I'm gonna take this, the Battle of Tours, also called the Battle of Poitiers. I don't know how do you pronounce that. It's a place in France.
Poitiers.
Yeah, Poitiers.
Yeah, because that's where it stopped. This is where Charlemagne said Tours and Poitiers. This is it. Cheers, boys.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's where the conference stopped. The Battle of Tours, 10th October 732. And just to remember, I think the Prophet died allegedly in 632. So this is exactly 100 years after. Also called the Battle of Poitiers, and by Arab sources, the Battle of the Palace of the Martyrs, was fought between Frankish and Burgundian forces under Charles Martel. Charles Martel, he's, by the way, the father of Charlemagne, if I remember this correctly.
Shit, I got the name wrong.
Against an army of the Umayyad Caliphate by the Abdurrahman al-Rafiqi, Governor General of Al-Andalus. It was fought in an area between the cities of Poitiers and Tours.
What?
Poitiers.
Did you read how they did this allegedly?
No.
Well, allegedly they stole all the wagons, all the chariots where the Muslims were carrying the booty around.
Yeah, exactly. So
and they had these carriages follow them. And what the French did, they went around the army and simply took all the carriages, and the Muslims ran after them. And I said, "Stop! Don't steal our stuff we stole."
Yeah. So okay, so when the Muslims arrived, they had this very skilled cavalry, but the Franks, they occupied a high ground and they kind of dug in there. So they kind of waited for each other, but after a while, because this was quite late, it was like in October, it's starting to get cold, and the Muslim army, they got impatient, so let's attack them. So they attacked them, but according to the sources, the Franks stood like a wall. So the Frankish infantry stood there like a wall, but this Frankish king, or I don't know if king, but this Frankish leader, Charles Martel, who I think is the father of Charlemagne, if I remember, he was he had an idea. So he sent another force back to the Muslim camp that was a bit away, where they had stored all the war booty, because they just continued on and travel, like they brought the war booty with them. So then, when the rumors about that spread, and also this Abdurrahman al-Rafiqi was killed when they attacked the Frankish infantry, so they all this together made them go back to the camp and flee back to the camp. And back in those days, fleeing from the battlefield is pretty much the most stupid thing that you can do. not that many dudes are killed when it's like shield against shield, but as soon as you turn your back around and you let the enemy attack your back, so to speak, then a lot of people gets killed, and a lot of Muslims was killed. I should just continue reading it. The Franks were victorious. Abdurrahman al-Akhfiqi was killed, and Charles subsequently extended his authority in the south. Details of the battle, including its exact location and number of combatants, cannot be determined from accounts that have survived. Notably, the Frankish troops won the battle without cavalry. 9th century chronicles, who interpreted the outcome of the battle as divine judgment in his favor, gave Charles the nickname Martellius, the Hammer. Here's why he's called Charles the Hammer. Later, Christian chronicles and pre-19th century historians praised Charles Martel as the champion of Christianity, characterizing the battle as the decisive turning point in the struggle against Islam, a struggle which preserved Christianity as the religion of Europe. According to modern military historian Victor Davis Hanson, most of the 18th and 19th century historians, like Gibbon, saw this place, Tours, as a landmark battle that marked the high tide of the Muslim advance into Europe. Leopold von Rank felt that Poitiers was the turning point of one of the most important epochs in the history of the world. There was an Ottoman historian, I don't remember what this was. Anyway, but they see this is very important. And it became important because after that, they didn't advance further into France. Yes. But what should we take now? Maybe we should just say something about, yes, so the Muslims ruled there for a long period of time. So they controlled Spain. Let's see, what's the exact dates? Al-Andalus.
Seems to suggest, according to what I've read here, that they sort of invaded around 711 AD, and they were finally defeated and surrendering Grenada to Ferdinand and Isabella in 1492. So that's well over 700 years. Call it 780
exactly.
Pretty much.
Yeah, so it's a long time. So what happened during all those centuries? I mean, you have to remember, if you take that from today it's 2017. How many, what was it, 700 years? Was it that?
780.
780. Yeah, so it's a long time.
Just on that point, obviously we have a comment from one of our Muslim viewers who's in the chat box, basically suggesting, as a number of Muslims do, that people wanted to be liberated, so they kind of welcomed these people in. And that's
no. There's another source that of a Christian guy during the conquest. He said like something like that the number of Christians that were slain, you say it like that were killed, was only God knows the number of them. So there were so many that didn't count them.
There's an almanac which counted all the. Well, it's not counting. He went around and they took the different accounts that were recorded in churches and blah blah blah. And he took the people, he took letters, he took incidents, and he made a rough estimate. And he said 7 million people were killed. Now, 7 million in those days is a huge amount, actually.
Yeah,
you know,
that's
like a percentage of the entire world population. 7 million were killed at the time.
In Spain or in the whole Arab conquest?
No, only in Spain. No, only during. I think it's the first 300 or 400 years. And the estimate was 7 million people. So there's nothing there about. They did not raise the Quran and the people fell to the floor. No. They took the sword, and everybody who did not say Allah is the greatest was killed. Women were raped. I mean, it was horrible.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to say something to its defense, I mean, that period in general was a horrible period. So it's not like
Well, that's why I wanted you to talk about the original pre-Islamic history, because it doesn't paint a horrible period for the Spanish. They'd already been invaded by the Visigoths, who had settled down, and after a couple of 100 years, can you assume they might have forged some kind of peace with the locals? And they
No,
were
but-
no
Yeah,
longer
but this is the
having
point.
revolts and
They settled
rebellions.
down. This is the point. They sort of assimilated and they sort of came to terms, and the people started accepting it, because then after a while, everybody was too tired to fight anymore. This is why when the Muslims came, people were exhausted. They didn't want to fight anymore. A lot of people simply said, "Listen, fuck this, not again." Okay, who is it now? Who is it now? And they just said, "Okay, well then it's just the next invasion." And they just said, "Well, forget it. I'm just going with the flow," and that's it.
Yes.
No, but look, according to this claim, it is the Visigoths themselves that welcome the Muslim rulers. So,
Like hell.
Well, here's a short quote from that book itself. The history of the Islamic Spain begins, of course, with a violent conquest helped by internal dissension among the Visigoths in 711 AD. Islamic warriors entered Christian Spain and defeated the Visigoth king Rodrigo. So it was
That's
internal
more likely.
dissension. And for those who don't understand English as well, that just means internal fighting amongst them. And so that obviously opened the door or made it easier for them to be defeated. It doesn't. I don't see any history where it says that they welcomed or asked for to be defeated or to be taken over.
No, but they make this claim.
Yeah, but they say this about Egypt too. This is the problem. There's a lot of Muslim apologists who say the Egyptians invited the Muslims to oust the Roman well, what do you want to call them? Emperors or the suppressors or whatever, because they wanted to get rid of the Romans, so they invited the Muslims over and to suppress them. Now, come on, you don't send a letter to the Muslims and say, "Please, can you invade us?" You don't fucking do that. It's ridiculous. And then you have accounts because of this. There's a priest by the name of Q or something, and he wrote down how many of these people were killed and how gruesome and terrible and brutal is exactly what you're saying. The time was brutal. How brutal the Muslims were. How many they killed and raped and beheaded and put the heads outside, which seemed to be like the favorite pastime in those days. And that's it. So don't come to me and tell me everything was peaceful and they were invited over. Don't lie.
And why, if they invited them, why did they did they fight them?
It's a bit like inviting America over into Africa. They come, but they never leave.
No, but like it's more like saying like, yeah, but the Polish guys, they invited the Germans to come.
And the Russians.
And the Russians.
Yes,
Then they come and then they
getting
try to
slaughtered.
defend themselves, but who cares? Like, yeah. So that is not true.
So where are you up to now in the history of Spain? What year are we in?
We are talking about the conquest. I don't know where we lived. We lived the Battle of Tours where they stopped. I just wanted to give a figure of how long this reign is. So if it's 780 years, if you take 780 years from now back in time, you would end up in 1237. So
it was different rulers though, wasn't it? So when I read through this,
it's different rulers, but I just want
wasn't all the same Muslims.
And even different outlooks, because I was just looking at El Cid, the famous hero of Spain, and his time is from 1040 to 1099, and he actually fought with the Muslims side by side with them. So in a space of 200 years, Spain had changed where Christians and Muslims were working together.
There were some
about that I can see. Yeah,
there were some guys that tried to.
But it's also interesting to note that El Cid was also fighting against the Moors with the Muslims on his side. So there's obviously something dynamic going on where it's not a simple them versus us. Islam has splintered into Muslims who want to side with the Christians and Muslims who want to occupy both of them.
You say side with them. What they basically appeared to do here was to so one of the things that they said here, the early Muslim invaders were relatively small in numbers, so it was politically prudent to grant religious autonomy to Catholics. Therefore, they maintained the Catholics in a state of dimitude. So that was in the beginning. Catholics fleeing Muslim rule lost all protection and their property was confiscated by the conquerors. Tolerance at this extreme, notes historian Robert Burns, is not easily distinguished from intolerance.
Yeah, this is the thing. Another thing I'd like to note, if you look at this number, 780, a lot of Muslim apologists come and say, well, look at the British, the colonization and the colonialism. Like if you look at India, if you look at other places. Yeah, but hang on. Muslims did this 1,000 years earlier. And this is something that Muslims don't seem to want or don't seem to be able to see and don't seem to be able to acknowledge. They had colonies everywhere. This is how Islam spread. And even today, if I take a country like I don't know, it doesn't matter, Libya, they have not released it. It is still being occupied. And this is something that I don't see Muslims acknowledging.
I think the big thing here is, we all acknowledge, and certainly from a European Western perspective, that there was slavery, that there was conquest, that there was colonialization, etc. All of those things we acknowledge in our past history. I think what I hear from some Muslims is they don't want to acknowledge that there was slavery. They don't want to acknowledge there was conquest without them, being defended. They went out there and literally, took over countries. And I think, all we need to say is that that both, let's call it, civilizations did that. But to try and cover it up and suggest that wasn't the case, I think is very disingenuous. Nobody in Western Europe is going to suggest that we didn't do those in our history. And it would be honest if Muslims could say, hey, in our history, we don't agree with that, or whatever the case is, or not. But it did happen. Just acknowledge that it happened.
But we don't have the same sort of history regarding slavery as Islam does.
I mean, that was obviously the previous show. I mean, we both had history, and it certainly seems like on the numbers when I did look at it that, yes, Islam had got into Africa, if we talk about Africa at that stage, before, Europeans did. I don't want to get too much onto slavery.
I know in the end, the Europeans, when they started forming their early empires, they started to pay the caliphate money to not be attacked by the pirates. And that carried on right up until the 1700s.
Hi, Rob. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, welcome. Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, I'm Saracen 786.
Just make yourself a little bit louder if you can.
Yeah, let me see if I can put this louder. So I'm a British Pakistani Muslim, and I met you at Hyde Park this weekend. I briefly chatted to you. I think you were speaking to Alex at the time.
Yes, I was speaking a lot to Alex.
Yeah, so I've been listening to your shows attentively. I purely joined because I really respect you as a person. I believe that you are a genuine person, and I believe you are genuinely looking for the truth. I've listened to the Gin and Tonic show. I think Pull-Ups invited me a few times to come on the show, and with that, basically, I've taken up that invitation. To just give you a Muslim perspective on different things. So hopefully we can have a civilized discussion. I'm not really here to debate things, but I'm certainly here to engage and give you my views.
Well, welcome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Saracen, what do you know about the story in Andalus in Spain, about the Umayyads and this whole episode in the Iberian Peninsula?
Okay, so my understanding was that the Umayyad caliphs, they appropriated religion for personal benefit. So at the moment I'm reading a book by Dr. Khalid Blankenship. It's called The End of the Jihad State. What the book is about is that this concept of jihad that's often misquoted. Jihad didn't just mean like warfare initially. It meant initially a spiritual struggle, one of chivalry, and it wasn't there to dominate the world. However, the Umayyads, who were very late comers to Islam, they realized that this could be politically expedient. So they used this concept of jihad, and they went for world domination. The Umayyad Empire was very much, it was exactly that. It was more of an Arab empire. The official Umayyad policy was not to convert people to Islam. That's just historical fact. What they wanted to do is take over regions, and people had to become wali, who were clients. So there was, if you weren't an Arab, you pretty much had to join a clan, and you had second-class citizenship. They went all across the world, from Spain to India, and they were quite ruthless. So I'm not one of those Muslims that are going to defend Muslims right or wrong. I'm going to acknowledge history where they've done wrong. I would say in the defense that they were invited to Spain, and perhaps I don't want to go off on a monologue, so perhaps we can discuss that after.
Perhaps you can share with us if you've got any information on that. So either paste a link or something like that, because that's not what we've found. So now we have competing views here, and obviously, logic dictates that only one of them can be true, unless we're in the quantum world. But I don't see that being the case. So as long as we're in the macro world, you're suggesting that they were invited. We are looking at it as in they invaded and were able to take over because there was dissension currently in the country. And it could have been that people kind of were okay with it or didn't know what they were getting themselves into. So it could be, and I'm not suggesting it is, but it could be that they had these new invaders come in and went, do you know what? The Visigoths were so bad, you guys might be better. That could have happened.
I think there's certainly an element of that. I mean, I did a course with Amira Benison, who's a professor of history at Oxford University, and she's an expert on this. And what I'm saying to you is from her opinion. Roderick was a horrible, horrible man. And I'm not saying I'm not one that says, oh, Muslims all good, Christians all bad. I don't believe that. I think we've got plenty of foul, disgusting Muslims in our history. But I do believe, if we're going to be fair, that there was a lot of dispute. There was high taxes within Spain. The Jews were treated incredibly bad. They were made to wear certain clothing to identify them, and in fairness, Muslims did the same in the future. But what we also have to understand is that the Visigoths and the Vandals, they were Arian Christians, so they didn't believe in the Trinity. There was a lot of dissent within that. There was a lot of internal fighting. There is a story of Roderick taking the daughter and raping one of the daughters of a famous count, and the count then invited Muslims in. Whether that's apocryphal, I don't know, but certainly from my research, I have understood that the Muslims were invited. Abdul Rahman III, who was the last Umayyad Caliph, came, and by and large, they did a great job there.
When you say they did a great job, let's put aside for the moment, because we've got a potentially disagreement about how they entered Spain.
Yeah.
Let's assume they were invited. Roderick was a bloodthirsty, terrible guy. And somebody, I don't know who would have invited him other than the king, maybe some people who were rebelling against him. Let's assume that they in some way were invited. Is your further view that once they got in that 780-year period that they were in Spain, is your view that they treated the Catholics or the Christians and Catholics and Jews better or the same as they were treated before? Because what's your view on that?
I think there's a few things. The early Umayyads, I think they weren't very religious. I think that needs, and we have historical kind of documents to suggest that they were very lavish. They pretty much took over the empire of the Byzantines and a bit of the Persians. They had these harems full of women. They weren't exactly the best Muslims, but what they did do is invest in the infrastructure, in buildings, in coinage, in civilizing society.
Are you there?
Yeah,
Oh, there you
sorry.
go.
Sorry, I got this. If we are to say that the whole of the 750 years, no chance. We had the Almoravids and the Almohads who were, they believed it, they came from the deserts. They came from the deserts of Africa. They're what we now know as the Moors. And they wanted it a very Puritan kind of, because they were harsh. They came from a harsh land. They kind of they challenged the Umayyads. They burned buildings. We have instances in Fez where Jews and Christians were persecuted. You know, it would be wrong to deny that. But what I would say is that was more the exception rather than the norm. We had great Jews like Ibn Shaput, who was a governor who became one of the army generals in the Spanish, one of the Spanish kingdoms. You know, we've had Maimonides, you know, and I think we have to be fair. I think, you know, by and whole, for the time period, if we are going to compare it, you know, we have Toledo University. It was a very civilized place.
Okay, I guess it depends what you mean by civilized. I'm going to post a link there into our chat here in the discussion. Yeah. I've posted into the other one. Maybe download that PDF, and when you get a chance, have a read over it and see what you think, because that is part of the Andalusian paradise myth that was written by this gentleman, and from which I'm taking some information here.
Sure.
And at no point were they treated as equals in my reading anywhere at any time. The best they were, if I go back to that little bit there, the early Muslim invaders were relatively small in numbers, so it was politically prudent to grant religious autonomy to Catholics. They therefore maintained the Catholics in a state of dimitude. So it seems to me that even from the beginning, and as you say, it got worse with more fundamentalists coming in the late 7th century or 8th century, whenever it was. Here I'm looking. But at no point were the people that were taken over by, let's call it under the umbrella term, Muslims, at no point were they equal. So they were always, in the best of circumstances, they were dhimmis or in dimitude to their rulers.
I think we have to be fair. I think we have to look at it from that time. Dimitude was something that existed pre-Islam. It's not something that the Muslims invented. If we look at the Byzantine Empire, you know, you had, if you weren't a Christian, you were under what Robert Hoyland talks about in Arab conquest, by and large, dimitude. It's not something that the Muslims invented. Yes, there was this probably a supremacist kind of feeling. I can accept that. But by and whole, I don't think it was, if we compare it to other places, it wasn't a sort of place where, you know, Christians or Catholics were under constant siege. And, you know, it was nothing like the Spanish Inquisition where, you know, where they weren't allowed to, because in Islam, a dhimmi has many rights within Islam. One of them is to set up their own courts. One of them is to set up their own, they can eat, they can have alcohol, they can eat pork, if they choose, obviously not Jews, the Christians, you know, and we have historical evidence of that. There were certainly some Christians who weren't happy, as not many Jews, but mainly Christians who weren't happy with the Muslim conquest. I can accept that.
Let me read you a little bit and tell me your thoughts on the following. I'll just read you a short little bit here. The founder of the Emirate of Cordoba, Abu al-Rahman I, the emigrant, had to flee Syria to avoid the extermination ordered against his Umayyad, I will pronounce it wrong, Umayyad, I guess it is, family by, sorry?
Umayyad family. Yeah.
Umayyad, thank you. By the rival Abbasids. Is that Abbasids?
Yes, Abbasids, that's correct.
Allied with the Berbers of North Africa, or otherwise known as the Moors, and helped by the Yemeni and Syrian settlers in Spain, willing to betray their masters, he proceeded to enter Spain from Africa, defeat the Abbasid, governor of Andalusian in 756, and make himself emir. He kept peace among the Muslims and between the Muslims, Catholics, and Jews by means of an army of more than 40,000 soldiers. It was he who ordered the demolition of the ancient Catholic church at Cordoba to build a much admired mosque. During his reign, the Catholics suffered confiscations of property, enslavement, and increases in their exacted tribute, which helped finance the embellishment of Islamic Cordoba. So that's just Abu Rahman the first and second.
Yeah, it's possible. Like I said, I'm not here. I think I'm not for Muslim dynasties. I think that by and large the Umayyad dynasty was a very vile dynasty. You know, I don't agree with Islamic supremacy. I agree with the early caliphs, the first 5 caliphs up to Imam Hassan. I don't believe that Islam. I think people have misused this word jihad and this Islamic supremacy, both the Abbasids and the Umayyads. I think they were empires. That's my opinion on that. So yeah, I'm open to that. That they perhaps did persecute people. You know, I'm open to that. I don't know enough about it.
Can I jump in now?
Please go ahead.
I was looking a lot of the architecture and things, but maybe
I mean, I think we have got a general idea here, and I've sent the PDF as well to both people. I mean, if you want to carry on, we can. It seems like that there was Muslim conquest over the 780 years. It changed between different, let's call them invaders, all under the banner of Islam. Even though they might have had slightly different views, they're all under the banner of Islam. And so, you know, they were finally defeated and pushed back in 1492, I think, from what I could see there. My main, and give me your views, my main point for this is, and I think Saracen's kind of said it to a point, is for Muslims to agree that you know, this was an invasion like any other. What it's portrayed as, and you know, as we look under the surface, is portrayed as being a paradise. In other words, it was considerably better than anything else either going on in Europe or in Spain at any time. And from what I can see and from what you've said, that doesn't appear to be the case. If we were extremely charitable, which again I'm hesitant to do, but if we were, it doesn't seem like the population of Spain, let's call it, was any better under the Muslim rule at any stage in that 780 years, and seemingly potentially worse at some stages. And that's what I'd like Muslims to acknowledge.
It's very hard to. Then if you're going to ask that question, you have to really make a difference between apples and oranges, and you have to yes, as I said, the period after Rome was sacked, you had a lot of problems, and you had a lot of scorched earth and things like that. So, but we can just say, when we look at things like slavery and the dimitude and like how they profited from jizya, the kind of poll tax, and especially we look at slavery. If you read this book, I can recommend this book by this Dario Fernandez, or what's it called?
Yeah, just pop it in the link there if you've got it.
He's has PhD from Harvard and MD from some other things. Anyway, but he goes through these things like how another important thing that I wanted to bring up is that he says in the book is that they mainly follow the school of Imam Malik. So there are these 4 main imams: Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, and Ahmed ibn Hanbal. So they mainly follow the Maliki school. And so in the book he talks about things like the view on slavery and a lot of things. And he also talks about, like, for example, female so-called circumcision or genital mutilation. And come to the conclusion that must have been very common in Muslim Spain. So is that something that is good? Another thing that I think is kind of un-Islamic, that is even maybe more gruesome in a way, is like they had a lot of so-called black eunuchs, that is castrated men that works in the harems of the rulers. But I wouldn't say that Islamic, really. You can blame that on Islam. But the slavery and sexual slavery and all those things are definitely part of Islam. That was very profitable. So it was to say that it was just sugar and spice, everything nice. That's not really correct.
It certainly seems to me that using the word Andalusian paradise, I think, is misplaced, because people think of a paradise, certainly in modern days, as being, a place where everybody would want to live. They're free to do whatever they want, kind of like an ideal Western world. Now, we obviously don't have an ideal world, but if there was such a thing, that's my view of paradise. Other people may have a different one. Maybe paradise for religious people is heaven. I'd love them to explain what their picture of that is. But for me, paradise on earth would be, an absolutely.
I wonder what for the Muslims. Maybe that's what it means.
I don't know who coined that term. Even I mean, it's when I listen to this kind of, when Muslims speak about this period, they don't talk about the period in that way. They're talking about it in strictly religious terms, and they are kind of the things that we kind of praise Muslim Spain for, like the architecture and things like that. Many of those things they see as decadence, and like that God is giving them fitna of a lot of money and things like that. So I don't know. My feeling is that there is this, Europeans have a kind of psychological problems that they are indulging themselves in a kind of self-hatred, and part of that self-hatred is to talk bad about their own culture and praising other cultures.
No.
What?
No. Imagine you come from a desert tribe and all you're used to is living in tents and fighting wars, and then you go into Spain and you conquer, and you've got all this vast wealth, and now you can spend money on all these architects and people to glorify your religion. You're going to say it's a golden age. You're not going to...
That's a good segue to the subject that I would like to talk about, because one of the things that I like about Muslim Spain, I mean, the architecture of that period I find to be completely gorgeous. I mean, some of
it isn't Islamic. None of it is.
Yeah.
It was all stolen from the Byzantium Christians.
Yeah, the design of this is actually wait a minute.
Well, it's
so this is the
it was
yes,
built
it's
on the
Visigoth / Roman
exactly
design. So this is the Church of or now it's a church, a Catholic church, but it started out as a mosque. For the first, this mosque was built over the ruins of another church that probably had similar design, but we don't know exactly. And then, as he said in this book, the Dario Fernandez, that in a kind of karmic justice, when the Christians come, they turned it once again into a Christian church.
Well, it never pointed towards Mecca, did it?
That's another story. I haven't dug into that too much. But they built it on the site there was a Christian church before. But if we look at this, this architecture here has clearly inspired the architecture of my former mosque in Medina. Here you can see here the horseshoe arch.
Oh wow!
If I read about
true, absolutely.
Talk about the horseshoe arch, Spanish Arco de Herodaria. I don't know how to pronounce that. Also called the Moorish arch, and the Kalo arch is an emblematic arc of Moorish architecture. Horseshoe arches can take rounded, pointed, or lobed form. Horseshoe arches are known from pre-Islamic Syria, where the form was used in 4th century CE in Babs. Anyway, the point is, when they conquered the different lands, not only in Spain, but also when they conquered Byzantine areas, they kind of steal the the style, the architectural style that already was there. So in the eastern part, you're going to see a lot of Byzantine style that was kind of East Roman style, and in Spain, the Visigoths were there, and the Visigoths kind of continued a tradition from kind of Western Roman style. So what they call Muslim style is actually Visigoth/Roman style.
I've got no problem with believing that mosque churches, they were built upon previous kind of places of worship. So, for example, Muslims borrowed hugely from the Byzantines. The whole dome structure, the minarets, absolutely, that came from the Byzantines. The Byzantines built upon ancient pagan sort of temples and rituals. Yeah, that's how religion kind of works. From my understanding, you know, the empires come, they built on previous things. Where I'm, as a Muslim, I'm absolutely open to admitting that, you know, some of the things that we've got come from culture, and they come from other than what would be seen as perhaps normative Islam. But Islam is not culturally predatory, although there are certain versions of Islam that are like that, who push this Arab Islam. And I'm happy to discuss that if you want to discuss that with Abu.
Yeah, but not now.
Yeah, that's fine. We can discuss that.
Do you have an individual opinion, for example, what happened in Andalus? Just to bring it back to the topic.
I think to go back to, I think I said what I believe in Andalus at the start of the show. Is there anything else that you need clarification on?
I didn't hear that.
He was basically saying that the Muslims were invited in, and was a paradise comparative to the time it was. Obviously, it's not a beach paradise that we would think of today.
Okay.
It was somewhat of a paradise compared to, for example, what was happening prior. And I think there's some dispute on that.
The question would be: is that your personal opinion, or is that something that you believe because you follow?
No, I mean, I studied this to a basic degree. I would never say I'm an expert on this, but I did sit down with Amira Benson. I did a course with her on early Islam Spanish history. I've also studied basics of the Umayyads. So, and that's certainly the information that I ascertained. I could stand to be corrected, but I think when you're comparing when Muslims go in there, I don't, like I said earlier, I don't think it was for the whole 700-800 years, whatever have you, that it was perfect. No, far from it. But I think if we're going to compare it, it's only fair to compare it to other places in Europe and around the world. So we're comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges.
I don't think we should compare it.
You don't think we should compare it?
No, I think it should stand on its own.
Okay.
Because I don't think that anything else being better or worse makes the other thing better or worse as well. So I think we should go and look at an instance of the Spanish conquest on its own. We can't say, well, because another nation invaded someone else, it makes it any better or worse. No, I think we should look at this as such and say, okay, what are the facts? What is it that we know about this thing, and not compare it to other things? And this is why I'm a little bit surprised that you would say, well, number one, you looked at history, and number two, you would say that this is a paradise.
I don't think I've ever said it was a paradise. And I think perhaps you missed when I did speak about it. I said I don't agree with what the Umayyads did. I believe that they appropriated the term jihad. And there is a book that I'm reading at the moment called The End of the Jihad State. The great jihad state was the Umayyads. They made this doctrine to get Arab soldiers to go and claim booty, and they did, and they spread Islam like that. It wasn't, but what I also said, perhaps I don't know if you were present at the time, is that the official position of the Umayyads was not to convert people. They didn't want to convert people. They wanted people to remain in dimitude so they could claim poll tax.
So you do not claim that the conquest of Spain was a defensive war?
No, I don't. I think it was a territory thing. I think the Umayyads wanted to expand their empire. I think with the Umayyads also, you have to understand that they've been chucked out of power by the Abbasids. You know, and this Abdul Rahman III, who went into Spain, you know, it was a refuge for him. The Abbasids controlled most of Iraq, Iran, that central, well, around the Middle East and Mecca, Medina. So there were two different empires. So there wasn't just one caliphate, there was two caliphates at the time.
Okay, but Muawiyah, who started the Umayyads, he was in Damascus. Yeah. Do you consider him to be a Muslim?
I consider him to be a Muslim, yes.
Why?
I think, why do I consider Muawiyah to be a Muslim? I think within the Sunni school of thought, he was a companion. I think I am critical of Muawiyah on certain things, but I think if I'm a Muslim and I believe in Sunni Islam, then there's certain things that we don't say about certain companions because they were chosen by obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, that's not to say he didn't make mistakes. He did. But I wasn't there. And I think the other thing about that period is history is incredibly skewed. There's lots of different groups. There's Zubayrites, there's Alawites, there's obviously the Shia of Ali, there's Muawiyah and the Umayyads. History was written by lots of different people. So that's the thing about Muawiyah. Like I said, there's many things I question about him. But you know, who am I?
You can't say who am I.
I say that humbly in the sense that, you know, as a Sunni Muslim, you know, if he was a companion of the Prophet Muhammad, and I know some people have questioned him, it's not for me to. I suppose because I believe in Islam, I suppose what I'm saying, because I believe in Islam, I believe in Sunnism, I can't question Muawiyah. If I was a historian, perhaps I could. If I put my history out when I can, but you know, yeah.
So you believe that he was a scribe and the whole story?
I believe he was a scribe. I'm skeptical of him, but I prefer not to say anything further.
Okay.
I think one of the things, as I listen to both of you and stop speaking, is I can see to a degree where it's useful to compare what happened in Spain to other things happening at the time. I can see why people will want to do that. At the same time, I would echo Stops in a view of, if we're going to look at this, we can examine that. And I think what seems to be more accurate would be, say, the Andalusian conquest rather than paradise, because that gives the impression that this was somehow better or not as bad as neighboring. So even if we were generous and we said that it was the same, which I think I'm very skeptical of just reading the book that I have or the little bit that I have, but assuming that was the case, I think the best we could say, if we were extremely charitable, is that they treated the people just as badly as previous rulers or people in or around the same place. But I don't think we can. Seems to me, as non-believers, I don't think we can call it an Andalusian paradise. I think we can call it an Andalusian conquest, and if you're able to accept that, I think that's okay. But to try and hold it to a paradise in some way that is better, you know, that doesn't seem to stand up. Everybody was violent, let's just say, at that time. But they were at least as violent. And then, of course, the North Africans that came in, those two different tribes, they were even more violent and more subjugation, etc., etc. But I don't think there's any time where everybody lived like they do in the West in any sense. Abu, thank you so much for your presentation. That was helpful with Andalusian. Thank you to everybody here. We're going to stay on for an after show now. We'll cut the video here, and we'll see you again next Friday.
Yeah. Peace.
Thank you.
Cheers, Abu.